All right. Well, good evening to everyone. Hope everybody's doing okay tonight. Uh, by way of opening prayer, Kyle, would you care to lead us before we start? Thank you.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity that we have to gather together. We thank you for this time to spend in your word, to reflect on your precepts and your truths. I pray that as we think about these things, we will do so from a humble and submissive heart, that we will do so willing to surrender all of ourselves and all that we have to you for your purposes. And I pray that as we spend this time in this quarter considering finances and wealth and property, that the end result of our time together will be glory for your name and glory for your cause. We love you, Lord. We ask all this in your Son, Jesus' holy name. Amen.
Amen. I am not Michael Ray, but I've been asked to fill in for this class that we got going on tonight. Lesson one on ownership, so we're going to be studying. Before we do that, however, has anybody got any thoughts from the last time around? We had the introduction, lots of interesting thoughts that were presented in that before we begin. Does anybody have any thoughts that they wanted to share that we had some time to reflect on that? One of the things I've been thinking a lot about was a comment that was made, and I've heard different variations of this idea, the idea that our day and age, we kind of live like a king would live back in the day and those kind of things. And I think about all the modern conveniences we have and those kind of things, just fresh water just at the, literally on tap, and the electricity, all the appliances that do all the work and those kind of things that we have at our disposal. I always joke with Brandy as I say, if we we're win the lottery, which I guess you got to play to win, and I don't do that. So I guess that's a pipe dream. But we would do this, and then we'd be happy, we'd be satisfied, and those kind of things. And it just reminds me of the parable of the rich fool, the whole idea of tearing down those barns and building larger ones. And of course, toward the end of that, God says in verse 20 of that parable there in Luke 12. He says, "But God said to him, Fool, this night your souls are required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be?" And again, of course, the idea of that parable being one who lays up treasures for himself is not rich toward God. That's the situation they find themselves in. But I think about that from time to time. It's like, if we had everything we ever wanted, and then some more, and then some more, and then some more at the end of all that, who's it going to be at the end? And that's kind of the question that we're dealing with tonight, is who really owns all this stuff, who really owns everything that we come in contact with. And that's what we're looking at this evening as we continue this study on God and money here. So I guess we'll begin by looking at these verses that Michael Ray's picked out for us. And everybody got really quiet all at once whenever it was time for begin. So I hope you guys are going to speak up for this next part, because it's probably better that you talk and not me. So if we'll just go ahead and look at these verses to begin us out here. And as we look at these, again, be mindful of who's speaking, the context, as it applies to ownership specifically, the key message of each of those passages. So we'll start in 1 Chronicles 29, 10 through 16. Someone doesn't care to read that one for us as we get going here, just to start us out here.
Therefore David blessed the Lord in the presence of all the assembly. And David said, Blessed are you, O Lord, the God of Israel our Father, forever and ever. Yours, O Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the victory and the majesty. For all that is in the heavens and the earth is yours. Yours is the kingdom, O Lord, and you are exalted as head above all. Both riches and honor come from you, and you rule over all. In your hand are power and might, in your hand it is to make great and give strength to all. And now we thank you, our God, and praise your glorious name. But who am I, and what is my people, that we should be able thus to offer willingly? For all things come from you, and of your own have we given you. For we are strangers before you, and sojourners, as all our fathers were. Our days on the earth are like shadow, and there is no abiding. O Lord our God, all this abundance that we have provided for building you a house for your holy name comes from your hand and is all your own.
All right. So in this particular one, we have David. After we have these offerings provided for the temple, the central message here, idea, something we're going to see just time and time again. David's thanking God for abundance and mentioning that all of heaven and earth belongs to God. Let's continue on, and I'm always confused whenever Michael Ray does these lists if I'm supposed to go from left to right or go down the way. I guess we'll just skip on over to the right side there. If someone will read Exodus 9:29 for us for this instance.
Moses said to him, "As soon as I have gone out of the city, I will stretch out my hands to the Lord. The thunder will cease, and there will be no more hail, so that you may know that the earth is the Lord's."
All right, so of course this is going to be Moses here after the plagues of hail in this particular instance, saying that the earth is the Lord's, so reflecting the idea we saw in 1 Chronicles. We'll skip on over to Exodus 19:5. The next one, if someone doesn't care to read that one for us, Exodus 19:5.
Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine.
All right, all the earth is mine. This is God on Sinai here speaking. Psalm 50:10-12 is the next one, if someone will read that one for us. Psalm 50:10-12.
For every beast of the forest, is that right? For every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know all the birds of the mountains, and the wild beasts of the field are mine. Is 12 here?
Yes.
If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world is mine, and all its.
All right, so we went from the heavens and the earth, we went to the earth is mine, so now we're even honing in on the beasts and cattle. I like the verse 12 where it says, the world is mine and all its fullness, so just pretty much everything we've got within there. So hopefully you're noticing a through line here that we've got in these verses so far. Leviticus 25:23 is the next one.
The land shall not be sold forever, for the land is mine, for you are strangers and sojourners with me.
All right. Once again, this is God on Sinai. We're going to come back, I think, and revisit Leviticus 25:23 a little bit later on. Jeremiah 27:5-7.
I've made the earth, man and beast that are on the ground, and by my great power, by my outstretched arm, have given it to whom it seemed proper to me. Now I have given all these lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, and the beasts of the field I have also given him to serve him. So all nations shall serve him and his son and his son's son until the end of his land comes. And then many nations, great kings, shall make him serve them.
All right, and this is from God to Jeremiah, through Jeremiah here in this case. This is to Zedekiah, king of Judah, during this time. We see the land and the beast are our gods to give in this case. And again, it's interesting this has been addressed to a king. You think the king would be the one that has that preeminence over the land in this case, but God has ultimate preeminence even over a king here in this case. All right, where we get to Ezekiel 16:17. Once again, if someone doesn't care to volunteer for that one, read that verse for us.
You also took your beautiful jewels made of my gold and my silver, which I had given you, and made for yourselves metal images that you might play the harlot with them.
All right. So here we see these idols are being made, but it's being made, ironically, with God's silver and God's gold. So in a roundabout way, God's ownership over these things is being used in an improper way, which I think is interesting for that particular passage. Ezekiel's prophecy to Judah in this case. Haggai 2:8. Someone doesn't care to read that one for us as well.
The silver is mine and the gold is mine, declares the Lord.
All right, once again, the silver and the gold are God's. Luke 14:33, skipping over to the New Testament here. Luke 14:33.
So therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple.
All right, so the words of Jesus in this case, emphasizing a different aspect of ownership in this case, renouncing that ownership and acknowledging God. And then we got two more. Let's do Psalm 24:1-2. next.
The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein. For he has founded upon the seas and established it upon the rivers.
Right, very familiar message once again. And then lastly, we've got 1 Corinthians 10, 23 through 26. If someone doesn't care to read that one as well.
All things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. Let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market without raising any question on the ground of conscience. For the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof.
All right. So once again, a big through line we see through all of this. We're going to see this a couple of times over as we look at these verses. Again, they come up again a couple of times. Question number one he had for us for discussion: what items in these verses are noted as being possessions of God? There's a short answer, and we can go into the long specifics here in just a moment here. But what are some of the possessions that are being listed as belonging to God?
Everything.
Pretty much, that's a short answer. All right, we're done. We can fit, yeah. All right. What are some specifics that we have?
It says their property is his.
Okay, yeah. So that kind of relates specifically to what we're discussing is the things that on this earth belong to us. Okay. Anything else? Gold and silver, which again relates to money in particular. That's what our big focus on this study is going to be as well. Anything else to mention?
Cattle.
Yeah, cattle. So once again, going back to property and things that maybe relate to the land. If we talk about like, I guess the bounty of the land, the bounty of the sea is what I was kind of thinking of. If you, harvest crops and those kind of things, or if you're fishing in the ocean or whatever it may be there along the way, even the bounty of the land is going to come back to you, land or the ocean or anything else thereof. All right. Any modern equivalences we could look at and see here and apply to these verses? Anything that we could take? Maybe we have cattle. Maybe we have those things. Was there anything else that we could apply to this in our modern day age that we could relate to this?
Well, probably stocks, bonds, things that they didn't necessarily have then would apply.
Absolutely, yeah. So anything that we have that would relate to possessions, ownership, whether it's temporary ownership or, as you mentioned, investments and those kind of things. Leviticus 25 referred to land, so we got real estate in this case. We talked about the jewels, silver, gold, any kind of personal wealth we have, personal possessions. Again, going back to what Brandy said earlier, everything, pretty much falls into that big umbrella of all that's in the heaven and the earth in this case. All of God's creation, again, anything that we draw from that, there's going to belong to God in the end of all these things.
Well, we belong to God.
Yeah.
Psalms 24 says, and those who dwell therein.
Yeah, absolutely. And then was it Exodus 19:5 talked about his people being his treasured possession? That's a good point as well.
We don't belong to ourselves.
Yeah, there you go.
We belong to God.
Yeah, we don't consider that fully to the full extent of that, do we? A lot of times. Any other thoughts on question number one?
It's interesting that all of these things are things that we make our identity out of. We build our identity off of the things that we have, the things that we own, even our own existence. Who I say that I am. That all of this is shaping our identity, and underneath that, in all these verses, is everything that you put stock in, identifying who you are, comes from me and belongs to me.
That's a good point. Going back to the farming idea and those kind of things. Well, I'm a farmer. Why are you a farmer? You own land, and whatever you're doing on that farm, you're a bean farmer or a rancher or whatever. That's a good point. And that's how you make your livelihood, and whatever you get beyond that is going to come back to that. And again, ultimately it belongs to God. So yeah, go back to the idea that Karen said, your identity, your person. I mean, we trace it back all to the beginning there. It all comes back to God. Any other thoughts on question number one there?
I'm just going along everything that was just said. Exodus 23:18 has a question: do I not fill the heavens and the earth, declares the Lord? And then that reminded me of Acts 17 at the end where it says, prior to that, the Lord determines the times and places for each one of us so that we might reach out and find him, though he's not far from each one of us, but it says, in him we live and move and have our being.
Absolutely.
So that goes along with
Yeah.
what was just
We had a lesson over at Vault Ridge, and an illustration I like to use a lot of times when it just talks about God's involvement in everything. I think about as a science teacher, food chains and all that kind of stuff. And of course, in a food chain, it all goes back to the sun, doesn't it? And even if you went to like the darkest depths of the ocean, these creatures that never even see the sunlight, if the sun was removed from the equation, even they're in the end reliant on the sun. And so the same thing even with God. Everything that we have, it all belongs to him, and if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have anything. So, absolutely. Any other thoughts? All right, well, let's continue on to number 2. And he asked us to read a few different versions of Leviticus 25 and 23. Did anybody have anything that was kind of notable as far as different kind of terminology? I don't know which translation you might have looked at to begin with, but anybody see anything that popped out in their mind whenever they looked at different translations there?
I think it's New Century Version. I don't know. I just put NCV and I didn't think to write down what that meant, but it said the land really belongs to me, God, so you can't sell it for all time. You are only foreigners and travelers living for a while on my land.
Okay.
And that was probably one of the more unique versions that I read.
Pretty plain, pretty clear. Anybody else? Yeah.
I guess it's the New Living Translation.
That's what I used to. Yeah.
I'm not sure. But it that means we are tenant farmers working for him. It belongs to God. We are tenant farmers working for him. So
Okay.
we're just there to manage
Yeah.
what he's given us.
Very good. Yes.
The New King James uses strangers and sojourners.
Okay.
Gods.
All right.
And
Any others?
every translation we looked at carried the idea of some sort of temporary and a temporary person that doesn't have any right or stake or claim
Right.
to the land that they're on.
Yeah. So he's listed a couple here. We looked at the NLT, was already mentioned, tenant farmers, ESV, sojourners, CSB. That's going to be temporary residents in this case. And Michael Ray had a note. Think about like the Native American view of land. The idea, I've read a quote once upon a time, and I'd butcher it if I tried to quote it word for word, but they had the idea that this wasn't theirs. This is something that belonged to their children and their grandchildren, something that belonged to future generations. The idea that they're the ones taking care of it right now, but it belongs to someone else. And so in this case, at a deeper level, it belongs to God in the end, and we're just passing through, like the song said, just a passing through, as we know. So we're just kind of here in the interim. How does that describe our relation to real estate? Getting a little bit closer to, I guess, the modern age here. If we think about ourselves as being tenant farmers, sojourners, temporary residents, how does that just relate to real estate and that kind of idea specifically?
Once upon a time, back when we were a younger country, a lot of people owned land, and the land was always, like you just said, passed down to next generation. So you wanted to take care of the land for your children and your grandchildren and your children, and so it was very, I guess it was valuable in the sense that you wanted to take care of it because you knew that other generations were going to make their livelihood on that particular land. So, but you always knew that you weren't going to, it wasn't going to be yours forever because
right.
You're going to pass on.
Can't take it with you. Yeah.
And the idea, I think that's being brought up here is you never are a full owner.
Right.
At any point, you're always some sense of a steward. The land is in your ward. You're cared for it. You're being tasked with managing it. And you could even go back to Genesis 1 and say God's given us dominion over it. We rule over it in some way. but it is not a inherited right that it belongs to us. It is fully recognized as his and not our own.
Yeah. It kind of made me think of like back in school, learning about feudalism, those kind of things. You have what the king up here, and then you got like a lower level where you've got some other form of royalty below them, and you got the peasants or the serfs that kind of work the land. But really, it belongs to that king if you trace it back far enough. And I guess that's where we'd be in the hierarchy there. We'd be down at the bottom, and God's up there at the top, and we just kind of, again, we're the ones working it and just don't really own it or have any ownership or claim to it, but he does in the end.
And that's not foreign to the Hebrews, to the Jews' mentality either. David shows up at the threshing floor of Araunah, and he says, have it. It's yours. Make an altar.
Right.
He says, I can't give to God something that costs me nothing. I've got to buy it off him. But his mentality is that the king wants it. The king gets it. So there's sort of that idea baked into a kingdom. This is all the king's land. We have the blessing of living here. He allows us to stay here and have our property.
Right. All right, continuing on, looking once again at Leviticus 25 and 23, what's the context? If we zoom out here, what's the context of this chapter? We talked about some specifics there, some particular words, but what's the big picture context that we see in this chapter?
Sabbath year and the year of Jubilee.
Yes. So we've got God's, describing what's meant to be the tradition during this time of the Sabbath and the Jubilee, highlighting God's ownership of the land in this case. A lot of things that you look at here communicate the same idea that we saw listed in Leviticus 25 and 23. There's an extra credit question. I kind of struggled with this one. I had to reach out to Michael to see exactly what he had in mind here. How long did Israel abide by this law?
There's no evidence that they ever did.
All right. So that was the answer that Michael supplied for me. So I was thinking, I don't know, 50 years, because that was until the years of Jubilee there in that case, at least listed in the context there. But he supplied a verse for us. Let me go back and find it in my notes here on my phone. Give me just a second to find it. So it was in 2 Chronicles, let's see, or no, excuse me, 2 Chronicles 36 and 21. Let's turn over there and go back to the idea that Kyle's suggested here. Let me get someone to read that for us at 2 Chronicles 36 and 21.
To fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah until the land had enjoyed her Sabbath. As long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years.
All right. And so just taking Michael's quote here that he's sent to me as an answer here in this case, as Kyle said, this kind of brings to mind the idea that these Sabbath and Jubilee years were just never really kept. Definitely not in their fullness, that Christ will fulfill every law perfectly and those kind of things, and we're just, human beings that can't fulfill just every single thing, but I guess they just neglected it altogether. And so here we have a symptom of their turning from God, as we see Israel's history just throughout that time in Canaan, the exile being a consequence of this in Babylon. So here we have an omission of these Jubilee and Sabbath years, in the case here we see. And so this is sort of catching up, is the way he phrased it, of these Sabbath and Jubilee years that had never been taken up to that point, if that makes sense.
Those two laws, the Sabbath and year of Jubilee, are two of the strangest laws in all of the Old Covenant. Every seventh year, you didn't plant any crops, and you couldn't harvest any crops.
Right.
The land had a complete rest. You think about the level of trust you have to put in your God to do that. He's saying, yeah, you've got a field, and you've been working it for the past 6 years. Next year, you can't do anything. You can't gather anything off of it. So that, right off the bat, is a very strange, that a whole year we can't do that. But then on the year of Jubilee, every 50th year, the idea was everybody who had sold their property, you got your property back.
Yeah.
And that sounds really strange to us, but you think about the purpose of that. God is ensuring that there will never be intergenerational poverty.
Right.
There will never be a people who just are homeless in perpetuity and no hope of getting out of that. And there's no stories of, well, we had to dig ourselves out and you know, it was the Cinderella story where the first of their family to go to college and finally build this big wealth. The idea was that every 50 years, everything's reset. And the people who had maybe made decisions and got themselves sold into slavery, their children weren't going to suffer for that forever. And that's what never happened. And that's why we read things like in Isaiah when he says the poor are sold for a pair of sandals. You have real poverty that was never God's intention taking place because the Jubilee year is forsaken.
Right. So here we have these people being exiled. They've left the land, and finally, you know, in a sense, you've got the Sabbath or this year Jubilee taking place here in this land, is what it said in 2 Chronicles. So very interesting. Again, relinquishing of ownership and giving it back to God and those kind of things, and taking care of the poor and all that. It's just very interesting. Any other thoughts on question number 2?
Well, I was also going to say something that Robbie mentioned. The way that we think about property is, like, this is my kids.
Right.
This is my grandkids, and then I'm storing up for them. And Leviticus 25, it does not appear that God thinks that way about our property.
Yeah.
He doesn't think about what that means for inheritances and whatever it is that we were thinking about. At the core of it, God looks at what is His, and He says, when I gave that to somebody, it was theirs, and in 50 years, you're gonna have to give it back.
Right.
That's something to wrestle with as we think about what we own.
For sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
Don't they kind of do that in Africa? You never really own the property in Africa. You buy it for so many years, and that's it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You
I hadn't heard that.
really own the property over there. I mean, it could be 30 years, but that's what it is. 30 years.
Interesting. Be interesting to look back and see where that began, you know, and where that came from. That's really cool. Any other thoughts? Question number 2 before we go on. So long story short, the extra credit question, we had a lot of those in Robbie's class where D was the option, none of the above. So that was your none of the above in this case on that one. So if you're like me and you guessed incorrectly, or at least by Michael's reckoning there in this case. No, but I think that's very interesting to study that and see that view of ownership, as we said. All right, continuing on to number 3. What right does God have to ownership? And did anybody have any verses to go along with that, I guess, if you could provide some of those verses there. What right does God have to ownership?
I found one in Job 41, verse 11.
Job 41 and verse 11.
Who has preceded me that I should take him? Everything under heaven is mine.
Yeah. We saw that same idea communicated just through so many of those verses that we had in our readings there, that it all belongs to God, right?
Well, shouldn't Genesis 1 be a verse?
There you could, yeah, right?
That's what I read.
From the very beginning, right? He created it, so it's his, right? Any others?
Exodus 19:5 also states that all the earth is mine.
Right.
So if it's all His, then He has every right of ownership.
All of it, right? All right, so again, you know, it's His creation. Jeremiah 27 and 5, if you want to turn over there, another one. Jeremiah 27 and 5. That's one we read previously, but we'll read it once again. Jeremiah 27 and 5. I have made the earth, the man and the beast, and the ground that are on the ground by my great power and by my outstretched arm, and given it to whom it seemed proper to me. Again, it's all His. He has the right to do with what He desires with it. And that applies to all the other things we talked about earlier in the modern sense, the money and the investments and everything else that we've talked about to this point. All right. Do we have any examples of, or what examples do we have of God transferring full ownership of any possession?
You know, there in Jeremiah 27, he makes those statements about, I have given all these lands to Nebuchadnezzar. But even then, he puts a time frame on it.
Right.
He says, until a time when his own land comes, and which is an interesting thought, that it all belongs to God. He said, I've given him some of it. A time comes when his land, the land that he owns, comes. But then he says at that time, he's going to become a servant of everybody else. That is, he loses everything.
Right.
So even then, it's not a full ownership. It's given for a period of time, and then it's going to disappear.
Right. Any others? Do you have a thought, Ron? Do you have one?
No, not really. I would, you know, if you go back to the garden, you know, this concept wouldn't even exist we're talking about right now if there was never a problem from
That's a good point.
the get-go.
Yeah, yeah.
Because remember, God put them there. The garden was there to be like what Morgan said in her translation earlier. They were tenants of that land.
Yeah.
They messed up.
Yeah.
Then they had to work for everything. So then the concept of work came into place. We're like, oh, we work for it. It's mine.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So because I earned that, I worked for that. So it's mine. Where that concept would exist if we never sinned. Sin didn't come to the world and all that. So if you go back, like I said, just to the garden, there never was a transfer of ownership to Adam and Eve. It was just, I made it, you need to take care of it, and everything will be provided for you.
Yeah.
It's a concept that's just, we've forgotten.
That's a great point.
So, like, I agree with Kyle. It was periods of time, but never, to me, really, ever do we get full ownership. Never really fully transferred anything to us that we really had as our ownership.
So once again, option D. None of the above. Yes, Karen, yeah.
I have another one, 1 Corinthians 6.
1 Corinthians 6.
19 and 20.
1 Corinthians 6, 19 and 20.
Do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, is in you have God, and you are not for you were bought at a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's.
So even our body, as we said earlier, doesn't belong to us, right? Kyle?
And going back to the garden, if you read in Genesis 2, verse 8, it's really clear what belongs to who. The Lord God planted a garden. Then he placed man whom he had formed in it. So he planted the garden, he made the man, he put it together. At any point the man goes, this is all mine.
Yeah.
He is delusional.
Right. Again, who made it all? Who made the rain? You know, who made all of it? The very ground he walked on, right?
Well, didn't the Israelites think that they owned the land of Canaan when they were?
Yeah.
You know, God said, "I'm going to give you this land," but not literally, because of course He took it away once they disobeyed Him and put them in captivity. But it was always God's, and if they had done what God wanted them to do, they would have been still in that land.
Right.
It's almost like, instead of saying we're giving to, it's almost a better phrase, like, I have this land for you to stay on, as long as you listen to what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And if you don't, you're coming off of it.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So that's just, that's how we think of it.
It's interesting, the language he uses in those moments is the land itself will vomit you out. The land will rebel against you. And you just think in the idea of ownership, I own all this, and it's actively disobeying me, it's fighting against me, it's ultimately going to throw me out. But the very thing that I own makes you kind of aware that I don't really have any control over this.
Yeah. So Michael has an interesting example talking about the domain of Satan, you know, the idea of him being the ruler of this earth, you know, the ruler of this world. That's a temporary thing as well. He brought up as not one I would have considered. I guess my mind kind of went again to the land of Canaan in particular, those promises that God made so long ago. But again, as we saw time and time again, that was a temporary thing, and it was conditional and all of that. All right, continuing on, if there's no other thoughts on that particular question for number 3, what does this mean in regard to our own assets, things that we, quote unquote, own? What is that? How does that relate to us personally in this day and age?
Well, I feel like it's the same as what's meant then too. It's, everything is, which you don't hear much about it this way.
Yeah.
This is kind of new for me,
Right?
is the way you have to look at possessions and those kind of things. It's temporary, all of this, I mean, all of it is temporary. And we need to steward it while we have it, and we need to share it as well.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
And even our souls belong to us.
Yeah.
Ecclesiastes 12 verses 6 and 7 bear that out. Remember your Creator before the silver cord is loosed, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the well. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it.
Yeah. Very good.
And you often hear, well, I'm my own man.
Yeah. Self-made. Yeah. Right. Absolutely.
You know, in the passage in 1 Chronicles 29 is really interesting to me because David's praying over all these things that have been given for the building of the temple. Everybody's brought, all these different pieces of their property, their belongings, and donated it to God. And how easy it would be for me to say, you see that gold-covered ornament on the temple? I did that.
Right.
I brought that.
Yeah.
David uses that moment to completely get rid of all pride and arrogance. And with all humility, he says, this is your stuff that we have brought to you for your purposes.
Right.
And that's what I think of when I think of, all of these verses in regard to our own assets. They are God's blessings that we've been asked to steward, but we're asked to steward them for His purpose, for His will. That's what should come from all of this is, less of me, more of God.
Absolutely. So some of my thoughts were God has every right to ownership, going back to some of the previous questions. He made it all. He sustains it all. So not only did He create it to begin with, but it just keeps going because He's involved in the process. He retains all ownership. Again, the idea that's been mentioned several times here. We're merely temporary keepers. Again, that idea of feudalism, again, kind of came to mind for me. Anything we own, again, air quotes here, is actually God's. We're just acting as stewards in this case and hopefully using it to continue His work, right? Michael Ray had written, ownership is important socially and economically, I guess, from our particular, viewpoint, but that's an irrelevant viewpoint at best or harmful at worst in the spiritual aspect. The idea of viewing everything as mine, and not giving God the glory, as we saw back in 1 Chronicles, Kyle mentioned there. God is the one that gave it to us to begin with, and we're just kind of, again, those temporary holders of that. Any other thoughts on question number 3 before we continue on?
It's going back to what Brother Kyle was talking about, people's generosity. That's honored. It's to be commended. But again, they're giving of what God has blessed them. You know what I mean? So we still have to have, even in that, like the people were given so much that they had to tell them to stop giving. They already had what they needed.
Right.
That's commended, but we still need to understand the concept that it's all God's anyway. I think even with that, you can't be haughty about the compliment and the acknowledgement because it's still His.
Yeah. Very good. Any others? All right, we'll continue on to question number 4 here. What conclusion does Paul make about meat in the marketplaces in 1 Corinthians 23 through 26? And what's the context here? I guess we need to start there. What's the context? We read this one. Did we not read this one? Yeah, we read this one earlier. But can someone refresh our minds here on what the context is? And I guess we'll talk about how it relates to what we're discussing.
Dealing with division, dealing with divisions in the church,
Right?
specifically this sort of mindset of maybe one group is more righteous or better than another group, depending on how they dealt with this particular situation. And ultimately, that's probably the Jew and the Gentile difference in Corinth. So that's kind of the context of the passage. It begins by showing that even the Gentiles are part of the family. He says that our fathers passed through the sea. None of the Gentile fathers passed through the sea. So we're part of a spiritual heritage, so we shouldn't be destroying each other over a situation like what he goes on to describe.
Right. So we've got the meat in the marketplace here in this case, and what was the major concern that was within the situation? We have meat that's being offered to idols, right? And what was Paul's, conclusion in response to this quarrel, that's going on?
I guess there's no issue for conscience sake eating the meat. But if you get to verse 28, don't eat it if it's sacrificed to idols for conscience sake. But in the end, verse 26, for the earth is the Lord's, the earth is the Lord's and all it contains. So, mark it. Unless it's offending or conscience issue, belongs to God.
Right.
It's interesting that even if it's being used for immoral purposes, it does not change the fact that it's still God's.
Right.
He still has ownership over it. And so whether or not you eat it or not is really inconsequential unless it looks like it's affirming something immoral. That's when he tells them to not do it. But the actual action of offering it to an idol didn't change the fact that that's God's animal.
Yeah.
It's God's meat. It belonged to him before. It still belongs to him after.
And the idol was made of his stuff too. Right? The gold and the silver and whatever else, right? So again, the idea that all this food, all of everything here came from God's provision. So Michael had, God created all and owns all. Anything we have is provided from him. Whatever man may do or say does not change that fundamental fact. How can that relate to what we're talking about as far as this issue of money and ownership goes?
We just got through eating dinner when we were doing this. I thought, even the stuff in our fridge belongs to God.
Right.
Taking this verse. Even, the pork chops.
Yeah.
It's
the fridge itself.
It's all God.
The electricity. Yeah. Trace it all back to God. Any other thoughts on question 4?
Or in 1 Corinthians 10, in verse 31, later on, it says, so whether you eat or drink, or whatever you do all to the glory of God. So, basically, any aspect, whether it has to do with any activity really, money, possessions, eating, the purpose and intent of the heart being for the Lord, for his glory and purposes is what I think he's kind of driving home.
So not just owning it, but what you do with it, right?
Yeah, not destroying what God has created over what God has created. I mean, we're not going to use, specifically here, God owns the meat, and they're destroying each other over something that belongs to God. And we do the very same thing with money, with vehicles, with jobs. People say, the worst thing you do is to begin an employment with another Christian. That's just going to be the worst. It's something that God owns. Don't let something that God owns destroy God's own creation.
Yeah.
If you think about it, this is extremely difficult concept for us today. It was even difficult for them back then. You look at Ananias and Sapphira. This is the main issue they had. If they would, and you would say it's looking at, we have the same problem today, so we can't judge how they're looking at this in the sense of the problem they had. But at that time, they were viewing, this is my land. It's my land. Why should I have to give a piece of this back? So I just still need to look good doing it, so I need to lie about it. And if
they understood this is God's, and that's, you're really just giving back to God's people at that time what is not yours anyway. So it's the same thing with the rich young ruler. That last problem he had, he couldn't give up with what God told him to give up. And he's just saying, you're just giving back what I already own.
Right. Yeah.
So that's a hard concept.
Absolutely.
And fire is really interesting too, because what does Peter say to him whenever they lied about it?
Wasn't
He
not
says,
yours,
after you
yeah.
sold it, he doesn't say, wasn't it yours?
Yeah.
He says, after you sold it, was it not in your control?
Oh, yeah.
Which is very interesting, the words that he chooses.
That stewardship idea once again, yeah. All right, we didn't get to question 5. I guess we'll mention that to Michael. But thank you, everyone, for your comments. Thank you. Made it really easy on me. Thank you.